You're like going live in 3, 2, 1. I think it's going. This thing prompted me for your video call, something. Oh, here's a checkbox that says stop. Also stop. Oh, I see. That's the button to turn it off. The behavior of the thing is changing for this meet recently, and I guess I was just a little confused there. But c'est la vie. So yeah, man, pre-engagement paperwork, prototyping stuff. I find myself doing a lot of prototyping stuff. So that's sort of why I want to chat about that. And I have this problem a lot of times, these prototyping gigs, they don't go off the rails, but they go off the rails. And so then you were chatting about it, and you said you had some pre-engagement paperwork.
Sure. I mean, it's
I used to do one called discovery. I remember those. You'd say, oh, yeah, we want to do some engagement. So step one, we're going to do discovery. And it's 10 hours worth of work, or it's 20 hours worth of work. It's something.
Right.
Pay us for the money for the thing. We're going to do the discovery. There's a report at the end. There's some findings. And then we can go ahead with like the engagement. That's cool. That works at a bigger organization. But that definitely doesn't work in the incredibly early stage business, startup business, where I find myself a lot.
Yeah. So why not?
Why not? Yeah, very good question. Primarily, I think that it is a desire for speed of execution,
right,
and a lack of funding. In this very early stage part, one of the fundamental problems of your early stage business is you don't know what you're doing.
Yep.
And so in this scenario now, what's the discovery going to do, really? Find out even more so that you don't know what you're doing? Well, yes. Okay. Yes. And that is, and that's a good thing, right? But very typically I think the thing is like it's a progression that turns it into a train wreck.
Sure.
Because early on you say like, oh, I'm trying to build this thing. I have I'll pick on OpenTHC. I want to get and start making software in the cannabis space. How do I get there? Well, step one is if you're not a maker, if you're not going to do the engineering work, and this is, I'm on the engineering work side, then you find somebody who's the engineering. That's me. Or, one of thousands of other qualified, early stage CTOs, right? And will help me get my domain, help me get my web set up. I need a lander. I need this. I need this. Oh, so I'm thinking about this. Do you know how to do something with APIs? Yes. Can you do this? And so it progresses,
right,
from a fairly informal thing to a fairly, formal thing. Another project I was just working on, they had the idea. And so they said, oh, and you know about early stage stuff. Why don't you come in? I said, oh, okay, cool. Hey, we should put some paper in place. I said, this is casual stuff, right? These are casual stuff. It's casual work. It's like nothing.
Tell my insurance company that.
Huh?
Tell my errors and emissions insurance that.
Right. But it's like 10K's worth of work.
Sure.
It's not hella money. It's not zero, right? But it's not hella money. And it's not like 12 months of billing at 15 or 20K. It is billing a total of 10K over like a 2 or 3 month period.
Sure.
1,000 and 2,000 and 3,000 here and here and here, something. And so, they said, so in the initial part of this, we had no paper. We had no pre-engagement paper. We had no contract. We had no scheduled deliverables or anything.
We had an agreed rate.
We had an agreed rate. I'll bill you for some hours. That's it. And I'll narrowly scope the stuff because I don't want to have a project that drags on forever.
Right.
So we did 4 meetings this month where I was telling you what to do and giving you advice. And then after the meetings, you asked me to put together some summary and deliverable because nobody on your squad knows how to take fucking notes. Cool. Oh, and then you had me do some actual work. That's 2 invoices. Here's the invoice for this month's worth of meetings and consultative shit. Here's the invoice for this reasonably concrete deliverable. You wanted a prototype demonstrating key management in Vault or Bow. I have done that for you, and I have given you some pseudo high-level APIs that other folks on your team could use so that they don't have to get in the guts, worry about key management, worry about this, anything. Set the environment variable to your bow thing, put this key in, you're off to the races, right?
So the expectation from the client here, your client, is we don't know what we want. We don't have any idea what we need, but we want something, and we need someone to deliver something, but we have no idea.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I did ask for some specifications on the front side. It was a 3-page document, dude.
Sure. Right.
That's, and I'm like, well, this is insufficient, right? The specification for sign-in and sign-up was like, they need to be able to sign in.
So, curiosity here. So, like, when you start working with a client like this, how much time do you have to spend before you are at a comfortable level where you know what they're doing, what you're trying to achieve, and actually building and working together instead of really just onboarding and discovery?
Yeah, I feel like that early part is a lot of ad hoc because they're forming more of the idea around what they want.
Yep.
After you do the basics, right? If you're building a little web appy thing, oh, well, customers got to sign in and blah. And most of the stuff, you just pick some reasonably good framework and barf out what the framework already has in place.
There's certainly a certain amount of basic framework, both from a business perspective, right? We need a domain. We need to figure out where it's going to get, how we're going to run this thing, where it's going to run.
And all of that stuff I can kind of do in a box.
Right. Yeah, you can do all that. You know what that is.
That is something. Here you go. Now, when somebody signs in, we send them to the dashboard controller or whatever the main app entry point is after sign in. And it's a blank canvas at that point. And now, well, let's put the menus and let's figure out what feature sets your app is actually going to try to deliver. And a lot of that's the idea that folks start with.
Like, how long does it take you to get from that? You've signed an agreement. You've decided, you've agreed upon a rate. You know what that is. They said, let's start working together. How much time, since you're talking hourly billing here, how many hours before you're writing a feature?
Oh, just the domain and mail and all that bullshit set up, varies, but it is never really more than 10 hours.
Okay. How many conversations? How much back and forth?
Most of the conversations before that are rather casual. A couple of meetings that are roughly an hour, okay. I would say. So that would be 3 to 5 hours of hanging out and not talking about your tech stack or any of that boring stuff. A lot of that is talking about what do you actually want your app to do, trying to tease out a very good specification from the 3 things.
Yep.
It says you want to have partnership billing, but under partnership billing, which I understand both of those words, and I sort of understand them in that sequence, but what exactly did you mean? I'm not sure on. Right. And you don't even have 3 bullet points after that. It's just a heading called partnership billing. And then the descriptor says, we want partnership billing.
Right.
For more information, please reread the previous sentence. And, not effective. So like, well, what do you mean there? Oh, well, I want families to be able to order, and I want families to be able to do gift card. And I want corporate clients to be able to come in and buy like 1,000 units of our widget that they can then have as like a prepaid thing that they can hand out to their employees as part of their HR program. I'm making all of that shit up.
Yeah.
These are kinds of stories that.
Right. Well, and often in these scenarios, you start making this up with your client to see how they respond because they don't have any words.
I don't do that shit anymore, man. No, I have found way too many cases where my experience on the business side, my experience on the entrepreneurship side says, "Oh, let's look at something. Oh, have you thought about something or other?" And I feature creep my own project with them,
Fair.
which, yeah, cool, more billable hours and maybe an extra billable contract, but at the same time, too, now down the road, folks are like, well, why did we decide to do this? Oh, well, our tech guy said it was a good idea. Oh, well, he's an idiot. Why did we ever decide to even do this? And it's like, well, I actually didn't decide to do this. I said, here's 3 things to think about. Y'all thought about them. Y'all decided to act on it. And then you asked me probably the dumbest question of all of project management, which is, how long do you think this would take? And and I roughed in some number and told you it was going to be plus or minus 50%. And then you were like, oh, yeah, well, let's prioritize that. So, I mean,
Yeah.
Being the seed of the idea, and then it doesn't work. Now you're holding the bag.
Right. Fair
Okay.
enough.
So I'm out on that. And I say, oh, well, you want to do that? I will say a lot of stuff about, here's what I see somebody else doing, right? These guys, one of these things, they wanted to do some ridiculously stupid thing with their sign-in process. And I was, hanging on the table, like, don't innovate around sign-in. What are you, stupid? Like, nobody knows who you are. You have no clout. You have no character that you can throw around. So most pages have a field and another field, and the page is narrowly focused, and they don't have an advertisement on their sign-in page. So nix that. Here's what you should do with this.
Right.
That's all you should do.
So is this like a week? Is this 3 weeks? Like, how much, because there's back and forth in that, right? So, like, how long does that end up? I mean, like, we got an idea of how many hours, but, like, what's the calendar look like?
You mean for delivering that, or
before
for
before you have enough foundation built, relationship, ideas, whatever, before you build that first feature? Like, is that so you're able to get that done typically in a week, or does it end up taking more like a month?
Oh, well, like, so if we stretched out the whole thing from like first contact to writing a check, that's a 3-month cycle.
Well, I mean, you've agreed to
that I mesh with.
You've agreed to a rate. You've agreed to start. So you've got a start date. You start doing that. You start getting that information. You're billable at that stage.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you're setting up domains. You're having these conversations. You're doing all these pieces, and then you're ready to. You've decided on your framework. You've probably written a basic framework, tied things together, but now you're actually writing a feature. Like you said, like that was about 10 hours. Is that 10 hours over 1 week, or does that end up stretching out over a month or 3 months?
Well, that's also client dependent.
Absolutely.
But on my own time, it's only a few hours.
Right.
Again, something that's like under 10 or 20. Before things get off the rails, like the easy part of the prototype is all of that out of the box crap that somebody wants and getting into the thing. And maybe they've already identified a tech team because they're not going to pay my rate for building something from scratch. And there's loads of good talent out there that just sort of needs some extra eyeballs. And then I'm doing that. They give me the spec. I got to turn that into what the other people want. That's through conversation. So expanding their 3-pager into a 1-page per feature set that they actually wanted. So now it's a 30-page document.
Yep.
And all of that stuff generally goes swimmingly, but occasionally there's stuff where, their tech team can't cut the mustard. Like, why did you implement that? Search doesn't work and is also the craziest way for you to implement that. And no wonder it took you 2 weeks, because you were like fighting the universe to make this work. Like, so now we'll have to redo it. But so things like that always go swimmingly. With the startup space, things go off the rails, not because of the technology deliverable. In fact, I've never seen it where that is the case. Where all of the stuff goes off the rails is that now we have the startup does not go as fast as people want it to go. Never fucking does.
Yeah, no.
But then we end up having these like organizational problems, and the finance and marketing and sales side is like, well, you guys don't have these features that people want. And you're like, you don't have anybody asking for features anyways. And you're giving us this like one deadly zone I refer to, the next feature folly, because customers don't want to have right now, but I talked to one person and they said feature X was the killer. So now let's work on feature X. But my tech team can't do it because I've already loaded up that team with 6 things to do. I'm available to do the stuff and I can do the stuff, but I'm not cheap. Then we do the stuff and then we roll back to how come our technology spend is expensive and we still don't have any clients.
Right.
And none of that is really a technology problem. But you're saying pre-engagement paperwork. Okay, so I can do pre-engagement paperwork. Here's my first one. I'm going to set up all your boilerplate and natural ceremony. I can do that. Put that in a box, write the check. Here's the deliverable. I kind of don't even need pre-engagement paperwork.
Sure. If you were doing that, you've basically got a package deliverable.
That's a deliverable box.
It's a you go to the website, you push the buy now button, and you deliver them that deliverable.
Almost. I have to type on the keyboard a little bit too.
But you could. I mean, sure. Even if you could write up what they get, right?
Oh yeah.
Put a invoice there that they can click the button and hit pay. You get the money, then you go do the work, because what you're doing is slightly tuned to them, but basically it's very standardized. Here's a formula that works that you're delivering to them. It is just a straight packaged deliverable.
So pre-engagement paperwork or any kind of paperwork doesn't save me on that.
Nope.
Now I'm in the spot where I'm doing the tech stuff, and occasionally I get assigned ad hoc work, because the other thing that happens here is folks are very poor. These early stage businesses, nearly everyone, unless they're starting their own business after like 5 years as a PM at Amazon, these folks don't do ticket systems and can't keep track of their own shit.
Yep.
Right? So then you end up in a scenario where you have a manager problem. Manager doesn't remember what they assigned to who. And then whoever's doing the work is also in the scenario of, I did all this work, I show my manager this stuff, and they're like, well, why did it even take so much time? And it's like, hey, idiot, we said this.
Yep.
A
large part of what they bring you in for, bring a fractional CTO in, whatever size and type, is to either take on the responsibility and say, we trust you, you go do those things, or to train them on how to run an engineering organization. And sometimes both.
Frequently both in my space, because like I don't want to join another startup as their full-time CTO, but I love to hang out early on and just get some stuff rolling, help you introduce yourself to somebody else who's better for your org. And typically somebody who has better philosophical alignment with the org.
Because you get to understand what their org is, what they need, how much experience they have. You start doing things like getting them trained up to use a ticketing system, getting them trained up to run projects with engineering and understand why estimates are bullshit and all of these things. And then depending on where they go with that, you now have an idea of what their next engineering leader looks like.
Yep, easy peasy.
And so you can help them, guide them to buy into that. That might be another fractional. It might be a part-timer. It might be a founder that they're bringing in. It might be a employee, but it all depends on what you've been able to help them understand that path.
I'm trying to, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
which is extremely valuable.
And where things get bumpy for me most of the time is when, as is frequent condition in the startup space, the work is ad hoc and poorly tracked.
Yep.
The deliverables poorly tracked. The specification for the deliverable is very, very fuzzy. So the ticket and the tickets that get entered are like what they would this would be a fucking saga or an epic or whatever it's called in Jira these days. I forget which one of those two things is bigger, but this should, in my simple universe, this should be a primary ticket with a number of secondary tickets.
Right.
Not one huge ticket that is refactor 3 big pieces of the app because the sales team has decided they don't like such XYZ, whatever it is they're not happy about.
That ticket is the starting point of a meeting where you start breaking it down and identifying what work needs to happen and what subsets and who needs to do that and figure out where that fits into scheduling and all of that.
So now that's big co-behavior. Yep. Because in the startup, you're like, damn the torpedoes, 4 bells.
Right.
So you kind of can't. It's not that you can't do that. It's that if you do that, you lose / waste, depending on where you're standing and talking about it, many hours putting the stuff together. It may be better to shoot from the hip.
This is why we advocate hiring seniors in startups, and only very experienced, because they can look at that big ticket and in their head break it out and say this, and start working on it. Whereas if you have to allocate this work to less experienced people, they don't have the ability to break it out. Someone has to break it up for them and then control and check and make sure that they're doing those things.
Yes, and also no. I sort of sometimes like to hand a reasonably good-sized ticket to someone who's a junior or meteor, less experienced. You don't get good at breaking that shit down until you get practice breaking that shit down.
You're letting them learn and training them, giving them the opportunity.
Experience is the best teacher or something like this, they say, right? The lessons are expensive, but what are you going to do?
Right. But somebody's paying for it, one side or the other. You pay for it by getting the experience to do it immediately. You pay for it by burning time while they figure out how to do it wrong, come back, do it again.
We say iterate, right? I don't say pivot, I say iterate. We'll drop that feature in and then we'll iterate. We'll prototype a Rev 0. We'll do a little show off. And provided that the whole room can do constructive criticism, there's a whole other thing that happens in the startup space where teams' frustrations are elevated and their communication ability breaks down, right? So instead of you showing off your prototype and everybody knows it's the meeting of the review of Rev 0 of new feature that's early beta, not even alpha, right? This is embryonic stage. And then you sit in the meeting and somebody else on the team is like, well, why is this so ugly? We can't sell this. You are dumb, kind of levels of feedback. And it's like, hey, man, we're all trying to sail the boat in the same direction here. This is the first color choice of paint that we had.
Right.
We're just looking and seeing, does everybody like this color? You could just say no. Or you could just say, I like the direction of the functionality of the feature. Please have a good UI by Rev 3, which is what we did on the last 8 things, but I think you weren't paying attention. But those kinds of things break down. Back to our prime point, though. Pre-engagement paperwork. What paperwork can go in place that I could have? So when somebody says, hey, man, it's hard to figure out what you're doing here because we're bad at tracking what we're doing. And we have you here to help us get good at that. And I had another uncomfortable scenario on a project recently where I had engaged with the primary founder of the organization, carrying 80% of the bag, and had partnered up with, another person who's more of a domain expert in that space. So they've effectively, not actually, but effectively the company is an 80-20 split at that moment. I'm working with Mr. 80%. Do the easy work. Start doing some of the hard work. I make very, very clear all the time, this is prototype. Here's a prototype of this. Here's a prototype of this. I'm only sort of interested in what you're doing, and I want you to succeed because I love entrepreneurship, and and you also seem to have the ear of some people with money who are interested in what you're doing. And so who doesn't want to be part of something that looks like it's going to be successful, right? I'll play along with that, but I'm not here for the long haul. I don't want to be around for the whole ride. I'm just doing this. Well, as that progressed and that team had additional friction, then that team decided they needed additional money. That dilutes folks. There was some discussion about that I'm not involved in, but it affects me later because 6 or 7 months into the deal, I turn in another invoice that shows, I turn in 2 pieces of paper. I turn in an invoice with like 2 or 3 line items, this class of work, this many, this total, right? But I also send in a work order document, which is at least a 1 sentence of all of the stuff that I was doing when I was booking billable time. Right. So you can see, the invoice shows 40 hours of development. And now I've got a work order with like 18 line items and some quantity of each of those is like, on this day I spent 3 hours writing code for your refactor. So then my guy I turned in the invoice as I've done 6 times before, no issue. And then they say, hey, I can't get this invoice approved. I said, approved by who? I thought you're the big dog, right? Oh, well, we got a new investor in, and he's got some legitimate questions about the work that you're doing here.
Well, it was done, so pay the invoice.
Well, that's how I feel about it. But I'm also wondering, like, what are the legitimate questions? I provided sufficiently good documentation, part 1. Part 2, our whole billing agreement is about you're buying my time to do whatever it is you're asking me to do.
Yep.
With the understanding that you are bad at specifying that. So naturally, when that comes back, it's going to be low fidelity.
Yep. So this
what paperwork protects me from that? What paperwork protects me from? My client provides me with low fidelity details, and I end up with a low fidelity documentation of my billable efforts.
Yep. Well,
same as my day job doesn't recognize that I was good and my manager forgot what I'm doing, but now a little closer to home.
Part of this is time, because all they're buying is time. Right? So if they don't understand what time is for, they don't understand why they're making different investments at different times.
Okay.
Right? So this is one of the things that helps if you don't do hourly billing. Ignore the vague fuzzies for now, right? If you didn't do hourly billing and you got paid in advance, just pretend you're in that world.
Sure.
Right? Your client never had to think about how much they were paying you because it never changed. If they say, I need to call Dave and I need to have him work on this thing, they don't think, how many hours is he going to spend? How much is this going to cost me? Because I have no idea. Right? Their investment is pre-known, right? And prepaid. And so you never have that end of term, here's my invoice, dispute my invoice opportunity. It's more about, do you want me to work with you next month?
Sure. I mean, I hear you. I have a few clients that I engage with that way. And I like that one. And that one is, you want me to answer the phone when you call. You want me to answer your email within 24 hours. I can do that for you. I put people on a base rate. and then I bill them for the time.
Right, but you see, you're still doing time, right? But
I am still doing
so
time.
if we repackage,
I want to back up a second.
Yeah.
The class of customers that is the I'll pay you this base rate to pay attention to me when I ask, and then for your time afterwards, have almost nobody makes it into that realm with me without demonstrating that I send them a paperwork for some bill, and and the money is in a day or two, 10 days, right? Folks who take 30 days and have a dispute on a bill, which rarely happens early stage in the startup, right? All of this stuff is also only happening when people are now recognizing that there's gaping holes in their boat.
Right. Sure.
Right. None of this happens when everything is going great.
Right. But part of it is
how am I going to pre-bill somebody who comes up with ad hoc work all the time, wants me to pay attention at whenever they text? What's the protection on myself so that I don't do too much?
So there's a couple of places that you can do this, and there's a couple of models that apply to these different scenarios. One of them is the unlimited subscription. So you work on one thing at a time, and that's it. It doesn't matter how many things.
You mean I engage one client at a time?
No. So for a client, so if you want to look for examples, so Design Joy is probably the most known example of this, because they publicized a bunch of it. And so like $5,000 a month, your work queue. Now they're designers, so this is a different workflow, but conceptually, and they just you have a backlog. They put things in the backlog and you work on them. If they want to change priorities, when the thing you're working on now is done, you take the next one, so they can move and shift whatever's in the backlog at any time. You give them a backlog, and that's it. When they want something, they document it, they put it in there, and that's what you work on next. And you only ever work on one.
That's the ticket tracking system.
It's basically a simple ticket tracking system at some level.
Anyway.
Right. Well, but if it becomes your interface to do work, you never do work that's not in that.
That is very difficult to do, again, for the group that is trying to move fast. And
maybe they're not your ideal customers.
Okay.
Right? So
look, that's a given. Or maybe that's not a given. There is some problems that I run into, but really just what piece of paper? What do I make them agree to? Like, okay, let's say I can
it's about packaging. It's about packaging and structure, right? Like, what is it that you offer, and putting guide rails around that offering, right? And figuring out a model that works for you that does that. And a lot of times when you start packaging, you can get away from that time and materials, because now you've defined a specific thing that they're getting from you. And that, like, you might say, I am managing the project for your development team. I'm not implementing it. There's never a case where they will call you and you say, I will build this thing for you.
Well,
or if you do, you send them a new proposal.
Your recipe involves a lot of saying no.
Yes.
Which might get you labeled as difficult to work with. And that can be problematic to your income. But it also involves doing additional paperwork on all of the work, which is now additional like overhead. Everything's got to have a ticket for these guys that do ad hoc stuff.
Well, it depends on the process that you take, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like
you have to enforce the process, though.
You have to enforce the process because the process is your constraint, right? I mean, that is, you define a process. You'd say,
what about when people are shifting their deliverable, right? Because again, I'm at these startups, their deliverable is very poorly defined. Give me a nice looking login form.
But you're not delivering their deliverable. You're providing a service.
You're telling me I'm going to do something, a different work product also.
Well, not necessarily. So instead of thinking of
my work product to
their deliverable,
tell your dev team what to do, instead of when they shit the bed, I'll fix it. and then do something.
Well, it's that you the thing that you're selling isn't your time. It becomes a constrained package, a constrained offering. That write it down, right? So start writing down the list of things that you like to do that work in this, and the things that suck and you don't do, and start figuring out what those are. And then we figure out that they're buying the package of, let's just call it fractional CTO, and it contains these things. The things that you want to do, the things that you're good at, the things that you like, the things that, you write that down. And since it didn't include these, those are not part of what you're offering. But the thing is that, and this takes time to get to, is that you're not building their MVP.
But I like to do that.
If you want to build their MVP, then that can be your offering.
Right. Well, now I'm.
But if you're building an MVP,
the zone of and the definition of your MVP is very fuzzy, right? What they say all the time. Oh, you've moved the goalpost. Oh, you moved the goalpost. Oh, you moved the goalpost. And then in the startup space, I also have the problem where things get extra bumpy because other participants aren't cutting the mustard there, and so you get stuck in their maelstrom.
Yep, you're waiting. You're waiting for someone. They're not doing the thing that you need. You have all
very typically in the startup space. It is, despite the fact that I have been ranting about this for many years with many other participants, many people are still in the "if you build it, they will come" mindset, and a lot of times the idea person will connect with an SME or a salesperson, marketing person who gloms onto it. And then they get some tech stack to build it somewhere. And then they have their other person show up either to look at them from the investment side or to help them with their tech, because you see.
If the thing you wanted to sell is build your MVP.
Yeah.
Right. So we now have that as a basic definition.
So
we don't know what goes into it.
$120,000.
We don't know what goes into it, so we almost can't price it if we have to have a guaranteed deliverable at this point, because we don't know what goes into it.
Right.
Or maybe you do price it and you use your price to limit what goes into it.
Right. I mean, all of that still boils down to factoring how much time you're going to have to take to do something,
or how much time you spend.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
You can control how much time you spend. You control how much time you spend. You can control what you put into the MVP. You can control when you deliver the MVP. Right. These are all things that someone controls in some fashion.
What am I doing?
We're going to do whatever we can get done in 6 weeks. End of story. We are going to deliver this thing in 6 weeks. Period. Guaranteed.
Right, but wait a second. The rub is that the definition of this thing changes.
Yes, that's the point.
Here's what's happened. Like, on yet another project I'm messing on, these guys can't get the dashboard of their app dialed in, which admittedly is very difficult.
It's iteration.
Especially difficult if you are not a pro designer and don't have a pro designer on your team and don't have somebody else who's like an HCI expert, and you're kind of not entirely sure of what your user's primary objective is in your app quite yet.
But an MVP doesn't need a dialed-in dashboard.
Okay, I hear you, and I agree with you. The rub is that other participants on that team are, let's say, they're very confused about what MVP means.
Absolutely. And that's not your problem.
It is my problem because I'm there trying to...
Well, and that's where...
I'm there trying to get them to... I'm trying to get them to write me a check, but also be happy about it, or at least understand it. Right? I'm never happy writing my lawyer
because you're waiting. You have to convince them to write you a check after you've done the work.
Depending on the engagement. So, like, sometimes people say, I want you to be my fractional CTO role. or some other term that's very fuzzy, but we'll call it that for right
But
now.
you're letting them define the engagement.
No,
You said it depends on the
stand by,
engagement because you're letting them define it.
stand by. I say, I'll do this. You'll pay me this many monies, and I will do this many hours of ad hoc things in a month. I will do, and I say, I will do up to this.
Sure.
But I'm also available for phone calls and emails. And as long as that kind of stuff is not too frequent, there's a cap on the piece of paper. I do have a piece of paper for this one. But as long as you're not blowing my shit up, and I don't do emergencies, and I don't do on-call, and blah, blah, blah. And if you want any of that, new piece of paper that has your base with its allotment this month that does not roll over, and then has these carve-outs for you get this allocation for I will do something. You want me to be on call? Sometimes people say, oh, we need you to be just like on call. That's awesome. I'll totally do on call. Only on days when I'm happy about it. So you guys, you need somebody on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, I'm your guy. But every hour that I'm on call is billed. Not at a full rate, but you're getting billed for that hour at 20% nominal rate.
So if you're thinking,
but I'm defining that, and I'm putting out a piece of paper.
Exactly.
I've got 2 or 3 pieces of paper for that.
So here's a different version
of paper for the messy realm of the startup that inevitably goes off the rails.
So if you define your MVP and say, okay, we are delivering not an MVP, we're delivering a minimum viable product, and we are delivering it by this date. We're delivering the minimum we can deliver by this date.
Right. See, instead of now fighting for a bill, though, now I'm fighting to get people to sign off on what minimum is.
No, because you control it. What you put in your paper is that you control what goes into it.
Oh, you are saying that the piece of paper...
You don't have to even write down what those are. It opens it up and says you are the source of truth for that because you're the expert.
So I get what you're saying. The piece of paper defines that everybody else drops work items into a work log. They drop them once into this want bucket.
Yeah.
But I am the sole source of truth for which items get pulled from the want bucket into the work bucket.
Right. And we will do everything that we can, but the constraint is it has to be delivered by this date, so we will not do anything that we cannot deliver by that date.
And then we
start dropping shit week 5, right?
Right. But and you would also then have some kind of thing that makes it very clear good enough is done.
Exactly.
But and I'm the sole source.
And you're the source of that.
Good enough means.
And that this is because remember, and you're reminding them this is not your final product.
You shifted the argument from, hey, I did a bunch of stupid shit you wanted me to do. Where's my money? To you want a bunch of stupid shit, and now I have to keep telling you you don't get it. Right. I still have a, there's
you'll get it later. You don't need it now. I'm the expert in this. You don't need it now. We're going to get this minimal thing out there. That's what's going to get you to your next step, right? That's why you got me. I'm your expert, right?
Okay.
And we had, because we put a date in stone and we said on this date, we are delivering a runnable, executable, minimal thing. I know we can do this. Now, what happens after that? We figure that out. We can start talking about that 2 or 3 weeks out, right? Whatever.
You basically put everything there is into next.
Yes.
Right? You have your, I want this. You have your one bucket. You have your next bucket, and you have your current work bucket. I am the authority on what goes from the one bucket into the work bucket. And I'm also the authority on designating when something is in the want bucket and should go to the next bucket. And lots of stuff should just stay in the want bucket and go to the bottom of that bucket.
Right.
Right. And so my pre-engagement paperwork is, and we should wrap here pretty quick. I got another thing I got to do, but I think you're onto something, or at least
and this you can deliver. You can deliver for a fixed price. You know what that date is. You can deliver this for a fixed price. You know what your risk is.
No. Well, we could box this in very, very easily and say,
Yep.
oh, I've got your 3-page spec. I agree that I will do a minimum on this one. I'm going to be, and here's the part of the contract that says I am sole discretion of what that means. You should also expect that these kinds of things will not be addressed.
Yep.
And you can put a nice list of stuff there to put the early squash on conversations like, oh, can we change that icon color? Fuck you, right?
Deal with it later.
Primarily focused on functionality.
And
This
define
and this.
because
Well, hang on. I do one thing. This is my phase 1 document, basically. Yep. And so I think also with this kind of mechanism, I would have to introduce a new document at phase 2.
Yes, it's a different
all of the shit in the next bucket and now gets sorted, and some of it gets put into phase 2 and phase 3. For
phase
example.
2 might be you just help them find an agency.
Oh yeah, I mean, I get this part right now because where maybe I'm not doing the recipe we've just discussed. I'm not doing that. I do here's my general engagement agreement because I have to have that again. E&O and all those guys want you to get something, right? I do that, and that is basically just I'll do stuff for you according to the terms appendix over here. And you'll pay me.
Right. It's just work for hire.
Because you don't know what you're doing. But it does have, it doesn't say it exactly like that. But it does say, the client knows they're engaging in exploratory and discovery type of work. Right. And that estimates are difficult. I've got some paper words in there that lets them know I'm not doing estimates. Right? Stuff like that. Because you can't estimate an unknown amount of work.
We can only estimate things that we've done before.
Right.
And we're always doing new things.
Or where lots of the attributes of the thing we're trying to do are known.
Right.
You can go to the moon, right? Because you kind of know where the moon's going to be in the future. Your startup, you do not have any idea the desires that your salesperson is going to express from those prospects. You have no idea what's coming next week.
And so with your MVP thing, right? The other thing is that what you tell them is these are some of the things that this is the process of how it works. But what they're getting is that minimum thing that they can use to show to investors, they can show to potential clients, they can demonstrate.
Well, this is whatever
you know what
the deliverable from my pre-paperwork is.
Right. And that's what they're buying.
Right.
They're not buying an MVP. They're buying a thing they can use for that.
Yeah, I mean, so
your
pre-engagement paperwork I advise here, so, to summarize in the last minute or something, is scope the work, which is always a good idea, but then finite time box the thing that necessitates another piece of paper down the road, and then put yourself or myself in charge of what makes it into the work queue. And once people scribbled on that, then it's down to me to be able to say, oh, that's out of scope, 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 right? Out of scope, phase next, out of scope, phase next. Now let's do the next one. And then the next one will say we want to feel our way around a bunch of fuzzy deliverables, MVP, this new feature, customer feedback engagement, competitive analysis, find us a dev team, help us find a new CPU, whatever that is. But each one of those is each one of those like a new engagement piece of paper?
It depends, right? Because maybe at that point you have enough knowledge that you're going to help them find a dev team. You're not writing code. So it's very much more advisory at that stage and helping them steer it and direct it and being the expert. Maybe that's the other side of that. Or maybe it's, okay, well, we've identified in conversation from the investors that we need these things to extend this MVP to make it target better. And so now you write that down. I got some weird pop-up.
No, I'm going to share my screen. I'm good with this. I appreciate it. I think I made some good progress there. I have one last little thing I would like to show you, just to like brag about a little bit. As I said, I have loads of these like legacy projects that I play around with that are like PHP 4 apps from back in the day and stuff. And loads of these folks are like, they're still figuring out that Docker is the thing. You know what I mean? In some scenarios, right? They're still whatever. But we had chatted about Caddy a while ago. And so I mucked about and I got two little things that are helping me out when I have to stage up any of those little projects right there. I got basically a Debian image with Apache prefork and Xdebug going, and you just like set some stuff and it'll run one website and it'll do all the magic for it, and it works out great. And then I made another one, kind of a shit hack, that does the same thing with Caddy and PHP and Xdebug. So like, these guys like, hey, a technology refresh is what the management calls it, right? So they're like, we need a technology refresh, help us out. And they've got all this legacy crap. And I've got now these two little things. I'm like, I can clone your repo into something.
Right.
And then change 2 lines of my config here and Docker up. And I've got now a reasonably good debuggable environment for the shitty code base that you've just sent me. And then in each of those, whether it's the Caddy or the Apache, if somebody's got weird rewrite rules because of their bespoke framework, because it's using Cake PHP from 10 years ago, which had
all written in an HTAccess file.
Yeah, or and had some mechanism of doing the incantation that changed, and now here's the new incantation, or etc. It's like I knocked both of those out last night. Just like no AI, barfed out a very simple Docker file that does the thing. The one for Caddy, I'll warn everybody, man, it's kind of a shit hack because it's a container that runs 2 things. You're not supposed to do that. You want to have a container that's Caddy and a container that's PHP FPM. But I saw some other guys doing it.
I disagree entirely.
You can do it in a single container, and I saw some other code that did it. I think I have a reference to one of the other ones I saw, but it was an older flavor, 7.4 and some other stuff. Like my piece of crap, I'm just giving you Debian 12, man. So like, it's got a lot of OS features, probably too many. My image is too fat. And then you just make your own init for the thing to go. Look at this dirty trash. I just like run FPM start, and then I run the blocking Caddy thing in the foreground. And it's like, but I've seen like, you're saying like you disagree, your container should only do one thing. There's a couple of other different containers I've pulled down and looked at, and then you look at their init, and they're not using something like Supervisor D or Tiny. They've got their own shit hack init, like a shell script. And Docker even tells you like, put some signal trap handlers in there and some stuff like this. And as you can see, I ignored all that. This is my dev environment. When I press Control,
it's a dev environment.
Bucket, right? Nuke that shit from orbit, boom, and clean all my stuff up. So I don't know. I've been shipping some stuff with this. I've been making stuff shippable by using this method, and now I've got it published. And then I found out a neat trick on Caddy, the way that it is handling stuff with that fast CGI going into the socket, and how it uses try files. Because there was some mechanisms that I had available to me that I knew how to get Apache configured, and I couldn't figure out this one. And this was it right here, to tell it, try the path and automatically add PHP to the end. And I also learned there were some issues I had around whether or not Caddy is going to add the trailing slash to something. So if you have a directory called image or output, and it has no root file in it, it has no index.html or index.php, and you go to /output, Caddy says 404.
Right.
If you go to output/, it also says 404. If you go into your output directory and create index.html or index.php, and then you go to /output, it will automatically correct it to output/ and add the trailing. So it's just like it doesn't recognize it that that's a directory
until there's a file in it.
it's not recognizing it from its file system. It's recognizing it from the existence of a file in the directory, which I was surprised on. But the whole thing is like working now, and this little technique here, and I got this is the technique I like to use in a lot of places. If the directory has index.html, use that. Otherwise, use index.php.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, like so.
Then it's your code bases and what you're doing and what you're running into. Which one you prefer to take first?
Absolutely. So that's basically the.
Now, in this case, your HTML is still being treated. It's still being handled by PHP. So if it had PHP in it, it'll still render.
I did a test with that, and I had FPM not running, and when FPM is not running and index.html exists, it works.
Okay.
So the static, because file server is still in effect when FPM is not active. But it does hit this route first. Like the spec for Caddy says, I'll do fast CGI before I do file server, which I'm unhappy about. And I've been trying to fiddle around with order file server before that and order. So I really wanted to go file server, then try PHP, then try reverse proxy. But Caddy seems to want me to do that by saying this route is handle path this one, handle path this one, and say, oh, that path or something. Anyways, I will see you in a couple days, man.
All right. Bye.
Well, thanks. Good chat. Out.